Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. South Korea's Constitutional Court unanimously removes President Yoon Suk Yeol from office. The decision follows his December declaration of martial law, which triggered outrage and a parliamentary vote to impeach. Global stocks tumble after President Donald Trump announces wide-ranging tariffs. The move fuels fears of higher prices and supply shocks, sending the S&P 500 to a COVID-era low. The 6th BIMSTEC summit begins in Bangkok, Thailand, with leaders from 7 nations in attendance. Talks on trade, security and climate action across the Bay of Bengal. At least 3 people are killed in a hostile drone strike in the city of Sidon, according to state media. The attack comes hours after Israel claims an airstrike on a Hezbollah member in southern Lebanon. Russia launches a wave of drone attacks on eastern Ukraine, killing 3 and wounding dozens. Kharkiv bears the brunt as fighting escalates across the region. In Russia, a civilian is killed and another is injured in a Ukrainian drone attack on the Bryansk region, according to the local governor. The United Nations opens a formal inquiry into an Israeli strike that killed 15 medics. The human rights chief warns that the incident may constitute as a war crime. At least 7 people are killed as spring storms unleash tornadoes and floods across a wide swathe from Texas to Ohio in the United States. The National Weather Service warns of more rain, flash floods and tornadoes as the system stalls over the Midwest. Uganda's President Museveni arrives in South Sudan in a high-level mission amid growing fears of civil war. He was received by President Salva Kiir, who has accused Vice President Riek Machar of inciting a rebellion. President Donald Trump's tariffs have caused chaos in global markets, with stock markets in the US, Europe and Asia plunging in response. The S&P 500 saw its biggest loss since 2020, dropping 4.8%, while the Nasdaq fell 6% and Dow Jones dropped 4%. Trump remained defiant, insisting that the US economy will come out stronger. He claimed that the US is undergoing a massive economic restructuring. Countries are already responding to Trump's tariff, with Canada announcing a 25% tariff on US auto imports that don't comply with trade agreement standards. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has welcomed her country's exemption from Trump's latest tariffs. She credited Mexico's good relationship with the US for the exclusion, which is crucial for Mexico as the country is highly dependent on trade with the United States. Sheinbaum also stressed the importance of maintaining strong bilateral trade ties. Let's listen in to what Prime Minister Carney and Sheinbaum had to say.
And today I'm announcing that the Government of Canada will be responding by matching the U.S. approach, with 25% tariffs on all vehicles imported from the United States that are not compliant with CUSMA, our North American Free Trade Agreement, and on the non-Canadian content of CUSMA-compliant vehicles from the United States as well. Our tariffs, though, unlike the U.S. tariffs, will not affect auto parts.
En el caso de México, pues no hay aranceles adicionales y eso es bueno.
Additionally, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called the tariffs a national crisis and said the government is working hard to minimize the impact. He urged a calm-headed approach in negotiations with the United States. Ishiba ordered his ministers to closely study the tariffs and consider supporting domestic industries and jobs. Japan's government also expressed serious concerns about whether the new tariffs comply with international trade agreements. The IMF has cautioned these tariffs represent a significant risk to the global economic outlook, with possible negative impacts on global trade. We are now joined by Jajit Bhattacharya, President of the CDEPR. Thank you very much for joining us. Jajit, what can you tell us about the impact that these tariffs are going to have throughout the world, from the east to the west?
On an immediate basis, what has already happened is on the US Wall Street, the losses are almost equal to 1% of the total GDP of US. So you have already seen significant impact happening in terms of the impact of the tariffs. If you look at some of the estimates coming out, there is going to be an impact of 10% of the median income of Americans in terms of increased cost per household. And that's quite significant, 10% of the median income. So the estimate is $3,800 and the median income is $40,000. That's a humongous amount of income, impact that's going to happen. Now, that's the impact on US households, and it's going to be worse as more steps are being taken by the Trump administration to support whatever their larger objective is. Its repercussions on other economies is also going to feed back into the US economy. And what I mean by that is because there will be an increase in cost of living in US, the consumption in US will go down, which means that they will be importing less from other countries, which means that other countries will also have a depressed output, which means that they will have less income and less consumption, which will then feed back into what US is exporting to the rest of the world. So it's going to go into a spiral if we are not able to undo some of the damage that has happened because of the tariffs coming in.
Yes.
I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel in the short run because these are complex negotiations that will be happening.
Jajit, some people, economists, are calling this the biggest thing to happen in trade, in global trade, in nearly 75 years. What are the possible responses for the world leaders, and chief economists in these countries hardest hit by these tariffs? We've obviously just seen Mark Carney respond with a counter tariff of that exact 25%. What choices do countries face in responding to this?
Yeah, in fact, it's the worst occurrence not in 75 years, but roughly 95 years, because the last Great Depression happened about 95 years back and was again triggered by random tariffs being put in, which has not been thought through. So, again, US is an independent sovereign country, so I would not be commenting around what their larger sovereign goals are. But the manner and speed in which it's being done, the global economy is not a machine or a computer that you change things at one end and immediately is going to give a response on the other side, and immediately capacities will relocate to US. It takes 5 years, 6 years, a decade for a shift in supply chain. And in the meantime, if the supply chains are disrupted, it's going to pain everyone because there is no magic involved in supply chains being resettled. In terms of what are the response of other leaders, obviously people are having an angst on it. Some are responding with reciprocal tariffs. For example, Canada has mentioned that they will be responding with reciprocal tariffs, which is going to exacerbate the situation. Others are handling it in a more nuanced manner. They're probably not talking about a reciprocal tariff in the open, but trying to work out through track two mechanisms, an alternate mechanism through which we can bring back some semblance of normalcy. Also, one of the key issues to look at is how the tariffs were calculated. As is now well known, the tariffs that was accused by the US government had accused that other nations are putting X number of tariffs, though that calculation of tariff is coming from the ratio of the trade deficit over the total imports coming from that country. Now, that is not tariff. So, which just means that even if the tariff per se is reduced, but there is still more exports coming from other countries into US, in terms of US mechanism of looking at tariffs, it will still show up as high tariffs. Also, what is surprising is that countries where US has got a trade surplus, they have still gone ahead and put in a tariff on them. And the reason why it's surprising is that the calculation still held. The trade deficit, now positive for US, was used and divided by the total import coming from the other country, and it was put that as the tariff, and therefore half of it was been applied on those countries. So it's quite perplexing in terms of how the calculations have been done. What is it that US is expecting from other countries? How should other countries respond to? When will this end? These are all perplexing questions, and there is no clarity because the US administration has not provided any clarity in terms of these calculations.
Jayjet Bhattacharya, some very informative insight there. Thank you very much for joining us. South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has been removed from office. The Constitutional Court upheld his impeachment over his decision to impose martial law last year, which caused a political crisis. A new presidential election must be held within 60 days. Until then, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo will serve as acting president. The court said Yoon violated his duty and called his martial law decree a serious challenge to democracy. It also stated his actions created chaos in South Korea's economy and foreign policy. Let's listen in.
법치국가 원리와 민주국가 원리의 기본 원칙들을 위반한 것으로 그 자체로 헌법 질서를 침해하고 민주공화정의 안정성에 심각한 위해를 끼쳤습니다. 재판관 전원의 일치된 의견으로 주문을 선고합니다. 탄핵 사건이므로 선고 시각을 확인하겠습니다. 지금 시각은 오전 11시 22분입니다. 주문, 피청구인 대통령 윤석열을 파면.
Supporters of Yoon reacted angrily, while anti-Yoon protesters celebrated the ruling. The court rejected Yoon is also facing a criminal trial, including insurrection charges. The crisis started when he declared martial law over the opposition's party's alleged abuse of parliamentary majority. The decree was lifted after a few hours. The court rejected Yoon's defense that martial law was necessary and that it lacked legal justification. Markets stayed stable after the ruling. Authorities are now preparing for the election. Yoon's party has accepted the court's verdict, while opposition leader Lee Jae-myung praised the decision. Acting President Han vowed to ensure a smooth election process after Yoon's removal. Let's listen in to what Han Duck-soo, South Korea's acting president, said.
헌정사상 두 번째로 현직 국가 원수의 탄핵이라는 불행한 상황이 발생한 것을 무겁게 생각합니다. 주권자인 국민 여러분의 뜻을 받들어 헌법과 법률에 따라 다음 정부가 차질 없이 출범할 수 있도록 자기 대통령 선거 관리에 최선을.
Let's now move to the Middle East, where at least 3 people were killed in a hostile drone strike in the southern Lebanese city of Sidon. The attack took place in a residential area of the city. It was not attributed to any party, but came hours after Israel's military said it carried out an airstrike on a Hezbollah member in southern Lebanon. As per reports, the earlier Israeli claimed strike hit a car in a village near the border with Israel, injuring 1 person. Israel also struck Beirut this week, killing a Hezbollah official handling Palestinian affairs in the second such raid since a November ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. Lebanese Health Ministry reported 4 dead in that strike, including a woman. Lebanese leaders condemned the attack, but Israel said it was in response to rocket fire, which Hezbollah has denied. These strikes come amid the US's push for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. This week, the Department of Health and Human Services and its associated agencies, including the FDA, CDC and the NIH, began mass layoffs, cutting around 10,000 employees as part of a plan by President Trump and Elon Musk to reduce federal spending. Employees were placed on administrative leave until June the 2nd, with some told to retain their work computers. However, Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. indicated that certain programs, such as a CDC initiative monitoring lead levels in children's blood, will be reinstated, and personnel who are wrongly cut may also be reinstated. The FDA officials are asked to identify employees who can continue working temporarily during this transition. The layoffs, combined with voluntary departures, will reduce HHS staffing from 82,000 to 62,000. The goal is to ensure minimal disruption to public health services while managing the reorganization process. We move to Europe now, where amid United States push for Russia-Ukraine's ceasefire, the strikes continue. Russia drones have killed at least 3 people and injured dozens in eastern Ukraine in the city of Kharkiv. The attack targeted residential and offices buildings in the city, causing several fires and leaving 32 people injured, including a child. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is pushing for warmer relations with the Russian capital, reaching out to President Vladimir Putin and Russian officials in hope of brokering a ceasefire in the 4-year Ukrainian conflict. Back over to the US now, where Timothy Ho, the director of the US National Security Agency and the head of the US Cyber Command, was dismissed along with his deputy, Wendy Noble. Noble was reassigned to a role within the Pentagon's Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence Office. The reasons for their dismissals and reassignment remain unclear. William Hartman, deputy at US Cyber Command, was named as acting NSA director, and Sheila Thomas, NSA's executive director, became acting deputy. Lawmakers, including Democrat Jim Hines and Senator Mark Warner, condemned Hughes' firing, criticizing President Trump for removing non-partisan leader, while not holding anyone accountable for leaks of classified information. This move aligns with Trump's pattern of firing top officials and installing, notably, Elon Musk, leading efforts to streamline the federal workforce, met with Hugh last month before the dismissal. The NSA plays a crucial role in intelligence collection and cyber operations. US President Donald Trump extended his support to French far-right leader Marine Le Pen following her conviction for embezzling EU funds. Le Pen, along with 24 members of her National Rally Party, was sentenced, and a Paris court imposed an immediate 5-year ban on her from running for office, blocking her from potential candidacy in the 2027 presidential race, unless the ruling is overturned on appeal. The court's decision has sparked backlash, with Le Pen and her supporters accusing the judges of undermining democracy. Meanwhile, French Prime Minister François Bayrou expressed strong support for the judiciary. In a post on social media, Truth Social, Trump condemned the case against Le Pen, calling it a witch hunt while praising her resilience. He compared her situation to his own legal battles, which have included charges related to a hush money payment, attempts to overturn the 2020 election results, and the retention of classified documents. Despite the conviction, Trump and Le Pen both argue their cases are politically motivated. We have breaking news coming in now, where Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Bangladesh Chief Advisor Mohammed Yunus have held a meeting in Bangkok, in Thailand, at the background of the 6th Bay of Bengal initiative for multi-sectoral, technical and economical cooperation. We have more news coming in from the summit. Myanmar's junta chief attended a regional summit in Bangkok, where leaders observed a minute of silence in honour for the victims of violence. The summit emphasized regional cooperation amidst growing tensions in Myanmar. Nepal's Prime Minister Sharma Oli and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi during the summit. The 6th BIMSTEC summit opened in Bangkok with the signing of key agreements, including the BIMSTEC Agreement on Maritime Transport Cooperation and 2 memorandums of understanding with the Indian Ocean Rim Association. A draft declaration outlining regional cooperation was finalized during the senior officials meeting, along with discussions on the BIMSTEC Center of Excellence on Tropical Medicine and Disaster Management Initiatives. On the sidelines, Nepal's Prime Minister Oli held several bilateral meetings with Sri Lanka's Harini Amarasuriya, Myanmar's Min Aung Hlaing and Bhutan's Choi Ring Tubgay, focusing on climate change investment and strengthening regional ties. Oli also met with Thai business leaders, emphasizing Nepal's commitment to fostering investment opportunities. The summit highlighted BIMSTEC's ongoing focus on regional cooperation in key sectors such as trade, security, and climate change. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni arrived in South Sudan following the arrest of First Vice President Riek Machar, which has released fears of a return to civil war. Machar was detained last week by forces loyal to President Salva Kiir, causing international concern over the escalating clashes between their forces. These tensions have threatened the 2018 peace deal that ended a 5-year civil war, which claimed the lives of around 400,000 people and left the country in ruins. Museveni is the first head of state to visit South Sudan since Machar's arrest. Museveni's visit was at Kiir's invitation. He also said that he looks forward to the discussions to strengthening the bilateral relationship between the two countries. However, Museveni did not comment on the arrest of the vice president. Uganda had a long history of involvement in South Sudan. Just last month, Uganda sent armed forces to support Kiir's government, raising concerns over the country's role in South Sudan's politics. A powerful explosion has killed at least 5 people, including during a standoff between groups of gold miners in northwestern Bolivia. This is a rare instance of territorial disputes between the nation's mining cooperatives turning fatal. The blast thundered through the Yani mining camp as 2 rival mining groups disputed access to the gold mine near the mountain town of Sorota, some 150 kilometers northwest of the country's administrative capital of La Paz. Bolivia's Deputy Minister, Johnny Aguilera, said the suspected perpetrators of the attack was killed by the explosion, which was detonated by a remote control. The pre-dawn explosion at the mine struck a 3-story house and set cars and tractors alight. The fires wrecked several other structures and cut electricity. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world.